I'm about to piss off 99% of the people who actually watch this, which won't be that many, off with this review. But I honestly could not care less. If you're going to watch this, strap in. It's going to be an extremely long one. Barbie might be the most pathetic movie I've ever seen in my life. Despite what everyone and their uncle's second cousins would have you believe, this is in fact not the greatest fucking thing since sliced bread. I have never seen such blatant and extensive political propaganda in a film before. Now, those all-90s political dipshits are going to start, so I have to say, there is a difference between having political undertones, implications, or even an overall clear leaning in your media, and the entire fucking thing being one giant brainwash. There is absolutely nothing in this film that isn't either a direct political message or is very overtly applicable to said message. Therefore, it is literally impossible to criticize this film to any notable degree without at least touching upon the insidious, insipid ideas that it pushes with the subtlety of a flaming freight train crashing into a nuclear power plant. I can already predict what some people will be saying upon watching up to here.
You just hate women. You're an incel. You're an alt-right troll. A misogynist. You're just scared of having your white male privilege challenged.
Yeah, I've heard it all before. I've been subjected to these arguments since 2016. The fact we're at the point where labels such as misogynist, sexist, alt-right, etc. have gone from clear and meaningful condemnations to utterly hollow terms people just use to dismiss dissent and insult people they don't like shows just how deeply this bullshit has spread. Remember when feminism was about equality and about fighting against actual societal oppression that women had to face? Yeah. Me too. Sadly, third wave feminism has mutated into a backward, twisted movement that does not seek equality and simply seeks to avenge the perceived injustices women still deal with by attacking and hating men. Don't believe me? Let's look at what happens in this movie and I'll break down why I think it's so terrible, as well as some possible counters to my position. So, the Kens, aka men in Barbieland, are pathetic, stupid, worthless, and essentially lower-class citizens. They are all imbeciles and have no value in their society. They're just kind of there. Meanwhile, the Barbies, aka women, are all invaluable, from Nobel Prize-winning scientists to the president. All positions of any importance or influence are held by them. Politics, literature, science, you name it. The Barbies don't openly hate or despise the Kens, but they do treat them as completely disposable and expendable. This is portrayed as a utopia, with everyone living in perfect harmony except for one Ken. Ryan Gosling's Ken, who I am very upset is in this travesty, but at least he did give easily the best performance. Now, why exactly is he unhappy? Well, because he likes stereotypical Barbie. That's her actual name, by the way. This is the Margot Robbie Barbie, who for simplicity's sake I'm just going to call Barbie, and she doesn't seem to reciprocate, always sending him away because this is Barbie's dream house, not Ken's dream house. Essentially, she just treats him like a bitch and doesn't give a shit about him, even though he lives for her attention and affection.
But the movie addresses this, and Barbie apologizes to Ken, so the movie knows that was bad.
The movie heavily implies and basically outright says that Barbieland is the opposite of the quote-unquote real world in this regard, with the matriarchal Barbieland being a utopia, and in the patriarchy of the real world, women live miserable, hard lives, while men live it up and treat them like shit. This is outright stating that not only is the Western world an oppressive hellhole for women, but that men are all evil, misogynistic pigs who abuse and mistreat women. How great! Additionally, Barbie apologizes to Ken specifically because of him being hurt by her specifically. It's not like the Barbies as a collective go, wait, maybe we should let the Kens have an equal role in our society. The best proof of this is when the Kens directly fucking ask for representation in the government. Not even equally, mind, they ask for 1 seat or whatever equivalent, and the President Barbie says no. They ask for a chance at equality, and the Barbies literally tell them no. The president instead patronizingly offers them a quote-unquote lesser role, to which the Kens instantly capitulate and accept before she can even finish her sentence, and the omniscient narrator condescendingly says, well, the Kens, aka men, have to start somewhere. Keep in mind, this is the happy outcome, where Barbie Land is being fixed. The movie is telling you that men shouldn't be in any roles of power, because otherwise the patriarchy will happen and women will be oppressed. Instead, men should be entirely capitulant to the whims of women and should have no agency. They should be grateful for what they are allowed to keep.
But Barbie tells Ken to live for himself and not her. The Kens are encouraged to be themselves, and that's empowering for men as well as women.
Firstly, I guess that's apart from if a Ken decides he wants to be a politician or aspire to become a person of great influence, because then he's fucked. But more importantly, I saw straight through this veneer specifically thanks to the way Barbie words her statement to Ken. Perhaps the things you thought made you you aren't really you. I'm paraphrasing, but those are essentially her words. You can check it out on Google if you want. It's basically that. Now, this is a common defense used by proponents of third-wave feminism when defending their ideology from criticisms of misandry. Feminism helps men too. Or more specifically, the patriarchy oppresses men too. Now, putting aside the fact that this indirectly disproves the existence of a fucking patriarchy in the first place, as men wouldn't be systematically disadvantaged in a system made specifically to prop them up, the argument for this is that essentially every traditionally masculine or manly trait and behavior is drilled into men by this patriarchy, and that leads men to be sexist assholes, leading into the fallacious notions of toxic masculinity, teach men not to rape, etc. The idea here seems to be that the Kens represent the traditional form of masculine men, being muscular, handsome, etc., and that their tendencies are only kept in check when they're being constrained by their female superiors. When the Kens are exposed to the real world, which don't worry we'll get to, via the patriarchy, their inhibitions are removed and they become the embodiments of toxic masculinity, chauvinistic, narcissistic assholes who treat Barbies, aka women, like they're all stupid sex objects. The movie directly covers the third-wave feminist idea of mansplaining many times, as well as having the Kens be complete idiots, entirely consumed by their own egos and performative masculinity, constantly trying to show off how manly they are to both the Barbies and to one another. This is directly contrasted with Michael Cera's character, Alan. Alan is not big or muscular, he's not got a chiseled jawline, he's not overly self-confident, and he complains about how much he hates the Kendom and how much happier he was and is in Barbie Land. This is the third-wave feminist interpretation of what men should be. Allies, as they call it, completely unquestioningly on board with their ideas, and a vehement defender against the patriarchy, as shown when he beats the shit out of the Kens that try to stop him leaving. This additionally reinforces the classic feminist notion that, if you're not a feminist, you're a sexist. The Kens are not encouraged to be themselves. They're encouraged to be themselves unless they tread outside of the metaphorical box that the Barbies put them in. Ironic, I know. And as long as they don't overstep their worth. This is a perfect example of the way men are treated by this sect of third-wave feminism. I say this sect because feminism is currently far from unified, and there are many factions that completely contradict one another's goals. Men are given the pretense that this sect of feminism is helping them and encouraging them to break free of the quote-unquote patriarchy and stop being constrained by the gender roles forced upon them, when in actuality they're simply corralling them into their pockets as mouthpieces and pawns. If this wasn't true, then men would not be called toxic for being men, constantly called oppressors, and told that they are inherently rapists, wife-beaters, and more. Men are given the idea that they are inherently bad people, and that their only hope for redemption is to work against it and spend their entire lives atoning, accepting that they are deserving of this punishment, sins of the father, and self-flagellating by working not to be toxic by entirely giving themselves over as a feminist meat puppet. Men are also paradoxically expected to live up to many of their societal expectations, whereas women are not, but of course only the ones the feminists want them to.
The Kens aren't inherently misogynistic, they only become that way after they discover the patriarchy in the real world, and they change when they're taught it's wrong. This shows that not all men are portrayed as bad.
Let's discuss this so-called real world, which, as I said, is essentially made the opposite of Barbie Land in terms of gender roles, and is a painfully obvious attempt at social commentary. It doesn't come across as an intentionally exaggerated parody for the sake of laughing with the audience, or as satire. It comes across as the filmmakers saying this is a hyperbolic portrayal of what women have to deal with, and how women see the world. This isn't just supposed to be funny. This is supposed to leave the audience thinking, hey yeah, women do have it hard in our world. Hey yeah, men are assholes who sexualize and mistreat them. This is insidious propaganda disguised with a candy coating and sparkling glitter. Comedy used as a subtler way of pushing these ideas in a manner that makes them more palatable and digestible. It is also intentionally using an IP predominantly aimed at children, which will obviously be watched and consumed by them. This is not just meant to entertain. This is meant to be a poignant statement on the state of the world, and of course to burrow the relevant agendas into the mind. If you think I'm overreacting or being unreasonable, let's have a look at the details, shall we? So, from the very first seconds that Ken and Barbie arrive in this real world, men are instantly portrayed as pigs. Every single man Barbie and Ken go past is wolf whistling, catcalling, and shouting sexual things at Barbie, and she goes on and on about how she's feeling uncomfortable. Not directly, mind, but in an incredibly condescending way that is clearly meant to be directed at the audience. Ken does the same about his own comparative lack of discomfort, only less condescending and more buffoonish, as all men in both worlds are portrayed throughout the entire film as idiots, essentially showing him as a simple-minded fool enough to be instantly brainwashed by the patriarchy. It is so ironic how brainwashing is a theme in this movie. I don't remember a single male character in the real world who's shown in a positive light, not one. All of them are misogynists, chauvinists, perverts, or all three. We see businessmen in suits everywhere, and they're all doing the most stereotypical, over-exaggerated feminist talking points possible. We have a guy mansplaining, which if you don't know, is the sexist feminist term that is supposed to mean when a man condescendingly explains something obvious to a woman because he assumes she's too stupid to get it without his help, which in actuality feminists always use to just shut male critics up. There is also a guy cutting off a female co-worker and not letting her speak, even though she technically interrupted the conversation they were already having anyway. We have men constantly ogling Barbie, and a guy even slaps her ass, which is basically sexual assault, and it's played off as a normal thing that just happens. And while I'm sure this is true in some parts of the world, it is definitely not a common occurrence that will just be going on everywhere when you just walk outside your door, as this movie very clearly implies, even in a big populated area. Worse, when Barbie is arrested for punching the guy who slapped her, even though the way it happened would not happen at all because the guy committed a crime by doing that and she would easily just argue self-defense, the cops are all perverts too, talking openly about how hot she is. When Barbie is arrested again because she and Ken accidentally steal their new clothes thanks to having no concept of money, the Rozzers are so fucking animalistic in their arousal by her that they literally ignore her crime and tell her to keep the clothes because they're so enjoying fantasizing about her taking them off. I'm not kidding. That actually happens. Just imagine if these scenarios were reversed. I don't even need to go into details or give examples, just imagine. Somehow, this manages to be worse than Wonder Woman 1984, the film where a woman raping a man is portrayed as okay because she missed her dead boyfriend. Fuck.
Well, women are criticized too. Barbie gets called out by Sasha in the real world.
Yeah, so about that. Barbie finds the girl she thinks is the girl who plays with her, which by the way is a bizarre concept that they don't elaborate on or explain properly at all. Under the impression that Barbies had created a utopia in the real world by empowering girls and teaching them they can be anything, she is distraught when this girl, an utterly insufferable ideological mouthpiece called Sasha, tells her that she and her friends never liked Barbie because she reinforces harmful beauty standards and is childish. Not her exact words, but definitely the essence of them. What are her exact words is when she calls Barbie a fascist. Now, in fairness, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt and say that I think this was done partly for comedic effect, but the implications of beauty standards being akin to fascism is cringeworthy nonetheless in a cesspool of a script such as this. Now, I do believe beauty standards for both genders can be extremely unrealistic and potentially damaging, and I understand that it's often a bigger issue for girls, as they are led to believe that they need to look as physically flawless as the edited photos of millionaire supermodels. This has been hugely exacerbated by social media, which teaches impressionable teenage minds that a natural look isn't good enough, and that things like deceptive filters and edits will con them into believing themselves far further away from that standard than they actually are. However, firstly, to imply that this is a uniquely female issue is ridiculous, as those same models have their male equivalents, with their perfectly shaped muscles, chiseled jawlines, full heads of hair, and bulking physiques. Secondly, this is part of the current agenda of pushing it too strongly in the opposite direction, as if to imply that any kind of standard for beauty, both societal or personal, is oppressive. This has led to the rise of such things as the fat acceptance movement and the absolute myth of fat phobia, which we'll get to, as well as the ideas that men are pigs for having preferences in what they find attractive about women, especially weight. This despite the fact that weight is in 99% of cases a factor which one can control and change, whereas women freely judge and mock men for their height or size, which is actually set in stone unless you want to try some ridiculous surgery. That is to say, women should not be pressured into meeting unhealthy or unnatural standards, and that certainly is a relevant problem that should be combated. However, they also shouldn't be encouraged to see objectively unhealthy and unnatural lifestyles, like being fucking morbidly obese, as both completely fine and even beautiful. I believe Barbie enforces this erroneous and dangerous notion by having a fat Barbie doll that they go out of their way to include and promote on equal terms. Think about it. Barbies are, even according to this fucking film, promoting the very paragon of what traditional, conventional female beauty should look like. Otherwise, there'd be no merit to the beauty standards criticism. So if that's the case, this implies that the fat Barbie, they don't have names, is just as much this paragon of beauty as someone like Margot Robbie or any of the other Barbies. Now let me get this clear. I am not saying fat people should be ashamed of their bodies or hate themselves. I am not saying it's okay to harass or bully fat people, for any reason to be honest, as bullying is bad whatever the reason, and I'm not saying that fat people are all ugly. But what I am saying is that being fat is not beautiful, and that being fat should not be celebrated or promoted as something to be happy or proud of. I'm somewhat overweight myself, and I suffer from self-consciousness about it. And before someone says, well, it's not the same because you're a man, I know several women who do as well. But instead of saying, well, I'm beautiful at any size, it's society that needs to change, they actually endeavour to do something about it and improve their health, longevity, and attractiveness. Remember, being fat is not just a physical thing. I mean, hell, some people find fatter people more attractive, or just don't care, even though about 90% of both genders would likely find their partners more attractive at a healthy size. But it's also objectively unhealthy and is conclusively linked to countless conditions and deadly consequences, like heart attacks, organ failure, and strokes. Of course, no one should be forced to lose weight or change their habits, because at the end of the day, an adult is responsible for their own body and life, and they shouldn't be robbed of that. However, this is a fucking Barbie film, and who is the primary demographic for that? Children. Teaching children that being fat is actually an ideal instead of something to avoid is really not a good idea. Just because some people are insecure enough about their bodies to choose to be childish brats who find it offensive that medical science and dating standards exist doesn't mean that we should bloody disregard them, for Christ's sake. And at the end of the day, you can find encouraging people not to be fat as offensive as you want, but the results speak for themselves. Your heart, liver, kidneys, and pancreas don't give a shit about being politically correct. So yeah, Barbie is criticized, only for ridiculous moronic reasons by a character who literally only exists to be a mouthpiece for third-wave feminist rubbish that is now being pushed upon children. This same character calls her a fascist, tells her she set back feminism 50 years, fucking ironic, and later says that her own father trying to speak the language that her mum is presumably native to is appropriation, meaning she subscribes to the fucking cultural appropriation bollocks. So yes, Barbie is criticised in the real world, unfairly I might add, but in this case she doesn't even represent women as she usually does, she represents society, which means that yet again it's about embedding this notion that women are oppressed in the modern world. If this film was set in the fucking 1950s, they might have a point, though it would still not fix how clumsily and heavy-handedly it's been delivered, but it's not. So these arguments being levied just come across as utterly ridiculous.
Well, being a woman is hard. The patriarchy in Gloria's speech proved that.
So, when Ken discovers the patriarchy, I can't believe I'm fucking saying this, but it is actually what happens in the movie. He returns to Barbieland and teaches the other Kens about how in the real world, men rule everything and have all the power and respect, leading them to take over and somehow brainwash the Barbies into liking their new patriarchal vision. See, when Ken went off on his own while Barbie was somehow mind-melding with Sasha, he found that every man he met treated him with respect and as an equal, in contrast to essentially he's an underling in Barbieland. Then a woman simply asks him the time, and this makes him feel needed and affects him so profoundly that he decides to bring this knowledge to Barbieland right then and there. It's genuinely sad how Ken, the male representing figure, is fucking broken from essentially being treated like he's disposable and replaceable, which is ironically an actual issue that many men face on every facet of their lives. But the film spins it to be the patriarchy at fault. As I covered earlier, Barbie does apologise for her actions, but the root cause is essentially pinned on the mythical patriarchy, aka other men. So men's problems are men's fault. Nice. Once again, it also says that this is how women are being treated in the real world, given the implication of them being opposites. I also find it interesting how the women's issues in this film are always taken seriously, whether being called out directly or being indirectly alluded to through irony. But Ken's problems are always being used for comedic relief. His insecurity, his unrequited love, his always being put down and made to feel worthless. Now, I'm fine with any jokes, no matter how dark, but when you put it in context here and look at how women's issues are treated versus how men's issues are, it's a pretty clear subliminal message. They even alluded to him committing suicide at one point, which reminded me of how high the male suicide rates are compared to women, which feminists love to mock nowadays in between complaining about how men sit with their legs too far apart. I'm not saying they aren't allowed to make jokes about any of these things, far from it, but I find it funny with both the double standard and the fact that this is all politically motivated anyway. So, after Ken does this, Barbie brings Gloria and her daughter Sasha to Barbieland, who just accept that a fucking fairy tale dimension exists with basically zero shock or reaction, only to be horrified at how it's been changed in her absence. While the other Barbies were somehow brainwashed into accepting it, Robbie's Barbie is immune thanks to her visiting the real world. In despair, from Ken taking over her house and telling her to leave as she did to him, Barbie gives up and refuses to do anything, and is as a result berated by Sasha for being just what Sasha said she was. I didn't realise being depressed is being a fascist. And they leave. That is before Sasha inspires Gloria to have a change of heart by telling her mother that she liked her drawings and that her mother is weird and dark, like she pretends not to be. I'm not sure what the implication there is. Maybe that being girly or in any way feminine is a facade that girls are forced to put up by the patriarchy? Kind of a ridiculous assertion if so, considering femininity, just like masculinity, is instinctive and natural to the point that it's clearly exhibited in unprovoked animals. But then third-wave feminists abhor femininity with all their being, which is why they often write strong female characters that are just surrogate men that treat everyone like shit, are perfect at everything, and have a colossal sense of entitlement. Anyway, the two find Barbie in a catatonic state in Weird Barbie's house. Yeah, that entire character is essentially a clumsy metaphor for beauty standards as well. And they must rouse her to fight Ken's new patriarchy and return the rightful order of things with Barbies in control. Again, Holy Mother of Christ, I'm actually saying this out loud. This movie actually exists. But how do they do this? Well, Gloria begins by showing her sympathy for Barbie not feeling beautiful anymore, prompting a cringeworthy fourth wall break where the narrator says that Margot Robbie was the wrong person to cast for that. And then Gloria launches into this speech. Fuck me, that speech. So, she actually begins with, "It's impossible to be women because women always have to be extraordinary, but somehow we're always doing it wrong. Those are actual words of dialogue that made it into the film. She tells Barbie that she is, quote, so beautiful and so smart, end quote, just really going in on that, her, and that it, quote, kills her that Barbie doesn't think she's good enough. This could have been the start of an actual good speech to lift her spirits in an endearing way. Instead, though, Gloria goes on this rant about how hard it is to be a woman, which, note, has no music. It's clearly meant to be this really emotionally resonant scene. So, she talks about women, quote, having to be thin but not too thin. Honestly, the opposite is the problem now. And, quote, they can never say they want to be thin. I mean, whose fucking fault is that? We aren't the ones pushing fat acceptance shit. She says women, quote, have to be a boss, untrue, quote, but not mean. Why would you want to be mean, you crackhead? Is this insinuating that male bosses get to be mean with no repercussions? What rot. Next, she says that women, quote, have to have money, but you can't ask for money because that's crass. My only theory is that this is in reference to the supposed gendered pay gap, actually an earnings gap, and complaining that women can't ask for a raise in order to be paid fairly. The gender pay gap is actually a load of shit, which you can see more about in the description. I'll link several sources to more eloquent and informative videos on these subjects down below. So Gloria's speech continues, quote, you have to lead, but you can't squash other people's ideas. Sorry, what? Surely that's just common fucking decency for anyone. Usually feminists say that women are the ones having their ideas squashed by men. So to hear this woman complain about not being able to do that herself is truly bizarre. Now this one gets me. Quote, women are supposed to love being a mother, but don't talk about your kids all the damn time. The insinuation here is that the stereotype of mothers being obsessive over their kids, which, come on, everyone knows happens, is sexist, and that is fucking hilarious, especially when the people I've heard criticize this the most are other women. Yeah, and by the way, no one likes it if a guy goes on and on about their little champion or their little princess either. More importantly, though, this idea of women facing unique trials as a parent compared to men is hammered in from quite literally the very first scene. I had no problem with the joke about it being hard to be a mother in the stupid 2001 parody opening, because it is hard. What I did have a problem with is the pushing of yet another common third-wave feminist staple, which is the war against fathers. Third-wave feminism despises fathers, treating them as second-class parents, just as it treats men as second-class people. Throughout the film, there are many moments enforcing this, from the line spoken by some random woman who says kids don't take it out on their dads, whatever the fuck that means. I'm guessing it's just another way of saying dads and by extension men have it easy, which is demonstrably false, to this terrible line. It's pathetic. Both mothers and fathers face a huge challenge if they're actually good parents, and we should be trying to encourage unity and equality, not this petty, bitter rubbish. Continuing the speech, quote, you have to be a career woman. Says who? Again, that's your ideology pushing this. Normal people would say you can be what you want to be. Feminism is the thing that hates stay-at-home moms and wives. Quote, but also be looking out for other people. I'm sure by that she means that women unfairly have to do everything for others, probably men, but the way she phrased it just sounds like she's complaining about being expected to be a good person again. Funny that. You think it's bad now, though? Well, get a load of this. Quote, you have to answer for men's bad behavior, which is insane, but if you point that out, you're accused of complaining. This alone is unequivocal proof that these writers are in no way part of the traditional old-school feminist movement that actually wants equality, and are instead fully in on the modern feminist movement that just hates men. What does this mean? What does this statement mean? No citations, no examples, not even a fucking hypothetical. It just straight up says that all men just behave like twats and that women have to pay the price somehow. Absolutely pathetic. How can you hear this and not wince so hard you'd crick your neck? Yet somehow, there's still worse to come. Quote, you're supposed to stay pretty for men, but not so pretty that you tempt them too much, or that you threaten other women, because you're supposed to be part of the sisterhood. Holy shit. This has to be one of the stupidest and frankly most disgusting pieces of dialogue I've ever heard. Firstly, more often than not, women glam up and do things like their nails, hair and makeup to impress other women. This is a well-known fact. Secondly, it's women's choice to stay pretty, because what pretty isn't even a concrete concept. There is no correct look for a woman to have, as everyone is attracted to different things. No one is forcing you to spend thousands on beauty products a month, and no one is forcing you to, quote, stay pretty. Thirdly, what is this sisterhood bullshit? This is the same as when people imply that black people are somehow this avatar-esque hive mind with some unified culture. It's moronic and complete bullshit. It's also hilarious because it's another well-known fact that women squabble with other women more than with men, or that men do with each other. I mean, come on now. Finally though, this represents perhaps the most deplorable third-wave feminist point out there, and that's with tough competition, the teach men not to rape rhetoric. Now, if you don't know, this is an idea feminists developed in response to the argument that women shouldn't dress provocatively if they don't want to be raped. Now, to be completely clear, that latter argument is of course wrong and disgraceful, as it not only implies that men have the right to rape a woman who dresses too provocatively, but it also implies that men are animals who can't control themselves. So how did feminism respond to this stupid and easily debunkable view? By saying that in fact it's men that need to be taught not to fucking rape. That is not hyperbole. That is not a straw man. Teach men not to rape is even an actual slogan used by feminists. If implying that an entire gender is inherently disposed to rape isn't sexist, then I don't know what is. This deplorable notion is clearly being implied here, and it makes me sick that it's becoming more accepted in the mainstream. Of all the horrible political messages in here, I think that might be the worst. And don't forget, this will be watched by tons of children. Absolutely abhorrent. So to continue this bloody speech, quote, always stand out and always be grateful, but never forget that the system is rigged. So find a way to acknowledge that and always be grateful. To me, this makes no fucking sense, even from a logical standpoint. The system in the Western world is firstly not rigged against women. Feel free to try and prove me wrong on that if you think you can. And even if it was, how would that make it harder to be grateful? If you've somehow become successful against the odds in a system designed to keep you down, that should surely make it easier to be appreciative of your situation, not harder. Sure, you'd be upset about the system's unfairness and for the sake of your fellow compatriots, but not in regards to yourself. Anyone else see how stupid that sounds? Anyway, quote, you have to never get old. Okay, everyone gets old, men too, and a lot of men suffer from it just as much as women do. Quote, never be rude. Now, depending on the meaning of rude, no one should be, but I think this is meant to imply that women should be ladylike and seen not heard, etc., as though we're in the fucking 1800s. Quote, never show off, never be selfish, never fail, never show fear, never get out of line. Not only are these things pulled out of her arse with no enforcement, but they also apply far more to men, if anything, as men are the ones expected to suffer in silence and never show emotion. Men are the ones expected to become successful and rich just to make themselves worth having. And men are the ones expected to always get up and fight no matter what. Quote, it's too hard. It's too contradictory, and nobody gives you a medal or says thank you. Oh, boo fucking who? Cry me a river, for fuck's sake. All of us suffer hardship and trials, men and women. So why the fuck should one gender receive more just for existing than the other, and they don't have it worse? I swear these modern feminists have deluded themselves into thinking we're living in the past. And next, quote, and it turns out, in fact, that not only are you doing everything wrong, but also everything is your fault. Pathetic victimization much, and also painfully fucking ironic given this film. I know many women that would vehemently disagree with this placing of women in a victim role. Women are just as capable of overcoming adversity and powering through it as men are, but nowadays fewer and fewer are choosing to do it. Yes, women do face hardships, and there are certainly things that aren't fair and that should definitely be changed. I, myself, 100% support striving for equality, actual equality, and that means combating women's issues and social problems that affect them. But guess what? That also applies to men's issues, as believe it or not, they exist. We aren't actually living in luxury while the poor oppressed women hold up the ground we stand on, as this movie pretends. Many men have shitty lives and struggle immensely just to get by. This shouldn't need to be explained, for Christ's sake. If anything, the average woman has it easier than the average man. And again, check my description if you want to see some citations and evidence for this. Gloria ends her definitely empowering, totally not sexist rant of a speech by saying, quote, I'm just so tired of watching myself and every other woman, this is the exact word she says by the way, tie herself into knots so that people like us. And if all of that is true for a doll just representing women, then I don't even know. Well, it's a good job that that isn't true, you raving fucking lunatic. And what's more, the Kens have their own problems that are actually similar to men's real world issues. The irony couldn't be more potent. According to director Greta Gerwig, this speech was so powerful that it took 2 days and 50 takes to get right, as well as leaving everyone on set crying, even the men. Well, I was certainly close to tears when watching it, though not for the reasons they intended. The sheer cringe. That dialogue is so fucking horrendous that you could have done another 150 takes and it wouldn't have saved it in the fucking slightest. It was fucking agonizing, sitting there, listening to her go on, and subconsciously sensing the audience around me lapping it up. Now, I know I'll get mocked for saying this, but it's actually genuinely upsetting to me how much of this sexism and misandry is not only tolerated, but actively encouraged. And I'm not just talking about this film, I'm talking about in general. It's not fun having your struggles mocked and derided or watching others have theirs taken seriously. It's not fun having everything blamed on you. The difference is, I haven't personally seen any movies where a man goes on a rant about how hard it is being a man because women just keep oppressing him, because apparently most men are just reasonable enough not to pin the worst actions of certain individuals onto their entire gender. Holy Christ, imagine that. So, after that incredible rousing speech brings Barbie into action, by whining about being a woman and hating men for what felt like a fucking hour, she gathers the others and forms a plan. They're going to undo the brainwashing of the other Barbies by distracting the Kens. How? Well, by systematically using the patriarchy against them, utilizing the supposed weakness of those idiot men against them. These include mansplaining, narcissism, aggression, horniness, and generally just being fucking idiots. Again, this is not just about the Kens. These are learned behaviors from the quote-unquote real world, meaning Gerwig is once again using them as surrogates for actual men, and using this framework as a microcosm for how she apparently sees reality. It's just so unbelievably brazen and goes on for so long that I was in absolute shock by the end of it. This film really loves itself almost as much as it fucking loathes men, and it's also convinced it's the most poignant and deep script ever written. Spoiler, it's not. I can't even remember all of the actual things said, but the way in which the team break the mind control over each Barbie is by kidnapping them while the Kens are distracted, and then saying random things that Gloria thinks women have to deal with to them, and somehow they snap back into fucking feminism mode. It's hilarious, genuinely parodic levels. If this film was somehow secretly a brilliant satire of feminism, I would tip my hat, as it really would be perfection. Sadly, I'm pretty damned confident it's not. And I mean, if it was, then it's worked too well apparently, because everyone is lapping the message and theme up unironically. It's just unbelievable. The finale to the plan is pretty much to trick each Ken into thinking they care about them and love them, and then to make them jealous by flirting with other Kens, thus causing an infight and allowing the Barbies to sneak away and stop the planned vote to change the Constitution into a fucking Kenstitution. Does that not sound a bit fucked up to you? Now, as much as the beach war scene and musical number within was fairly enjoyable, I couldn't exactly get too much pleasure from it, considering how much it relied on the idea of men being animalistic cavemen oafs who can easily be tricked by their slavish sex drives. It's just irritating, because people are going on and on about how good this fucking film is, critics that I respect, and it's such a blatant piece of misandry. Nevertheless, of course, the Barbies win with absolutely no real effort, leading to the insulting conclusion mentioned earlier. That isn't the very end of the film, though. Unfortunately, we get a surprisingly existential scene with buckets of wasted potential, where Barbie meets her creator. She did appear earlier in the film and tried to claim she made Mattel successful, which can bugger off because Hot Wheels will be forever the goats, fucking fight me. And Barbie essentially chooses to be a human, because she can do that now. The scene is, however, spoiled, like everything else, by the cringe-inducing dialogue and politics. Hearing the supposed Barbie creator, it's not actually her, thank fuck, go on about the patriarchy, to listen to, as did her monologue about daughters, with the tacit exclusion of sons practically exploding in my ears thanks to the rest of the movie. The other problem is that this film tackles all of its themes with the least subtlety and originality you could possibly imagine. Tommy Wiseau has written more thoughtful and riveting psychological and philosophical contemplations. Motherfucking Samurai Cop is more of a progressive story than this. Gerwig thinks you're a fucking idiot. Now, Barbie chooses to go to the real world, and then the movie ends with her going to a gynecologist. Of course, I have no problem with gynecologists, but of course it had to end by focusing on a problem that only affects girls. Fucking keck. So there we have it. Barbie is a travesty and an abomination. Where I expected silly, light-hearted fun, I got heavy-handed hatred. Where I'd hoped to laugh at Ryan Gosling's silly antics and catchy songs, I simply stared miserably at one of my favourite actors being reduced to an abused imbecile who existed to prop up regressive ideologies. Where I wanted to see some novel production design and cinematography, I got generic shit that could have been made decades ago. Seriously, what does this movie have to offer that's so fucking special? Why should I overlook some of the most deplorable and blatant propagandizing of media directed at people of all ages using an IP for young children that I've ever seen just to appreciate this otherwise mediocre and unremarkable film? I am genuinely floored and befuddled that some of the critics I follow have not only raved about this thing, but have given it higher scores than actual greats like Oppenheimer. Hell, I don't even like Mission Impossible Dark Reckoning Part 1, but I'd watch it 10 times over before this. I cannot comprehend the level of glee these people must be feeling right now, sat there watching their undisguised, unfiltered political bilge receive unending praise and obscene amounts of box office dosh. It genuinely has me concerned about the state of our society right now, and that is not me trying to be all holier than thou and overdramatic. I am fully fucking serious. This is not the worst film of the year in terms of filmmaking or acting, but it's the worst in terms of being a hateful, nasty, and disingenuous product designed in the most cynical manner possible. I never want to see anything this egregiously stuffed with this crap ever again, but I know that I will, especially after the resounding success this one has had. Still, better that I watched it, so at the very least no one can say I'm criticizing it without having seen it. I'll just have to stick with incel and far-right troll instead. Just think though, Amy Schumer said that this film wasn't feminist enough for her. Good lord, in her version they must have put the Kens in fucking death camps. A Kenocide, if you will. As objectionable as this was, I'm at least glad I didn't have to see that film. Oh, and fuck the shitty remix of Aqua's Barbie Girl they put in the credits, and for having the gall to use fucking Lizzo. The best thing about the entire IP, and they ruined it. Typical.